So I'm going to present some work that I've been doing together with Ragnhild, and unfortunately she couldn't make it here. She's writing up her dissertation that she's going to submit in a couple of weeks, so she sent me instead to hold this presentation. I'm going to present mainly a methodological paper on discussing different types of motion tracking, and I'll just play this little video to kind of explain where we are coming from into this. So. In our lab, we are studying music-related body motion, and for this particular project, we're interested in electronic dance music. And we do want to understand more about how people move to this music, what types of musical features drive what type of motion features, and we are particularly also interested in looking at the relationships between people. So we look at the group synchronization and how people interact with each other and with musical features. And ideally, we would like to do this in a real club setting where you can actually do this and see the whole thing. For various reasons, not least ethical issues, we have not been able to do it in a real club environment. But rather, we've been looking at whether it's possible to do this in our lab, but in creating kind of an ecological-like type of setting. As you may imagine, working with motion capture in such an environment is tricky. When you have multiple people, you have changing light, etc. So this has been a major discussion of us over the last few years, has been how can we actually do this as good as possible and without kind of interfering too much with the people. So let me just start out by talking a little bit generally about different types of motion tracking systems. And I mean, here there are lots and lots of different solutions to use, and many of you know about this. But in general, there are, I guess, 3 different types we have been considering in this context, and that's either camera-based systems on one side or sensor-based systems on the other. When it comes to camera-based systems, you can use regular video cameras for recording people. Of course, there are many issues with that, even though cameras are accessible and they can easily be put up. There are some issues, particularly when it comes to lighting in a setting like this, when we do have changing lights. You may put on an infrared filter and do various tricks to kind of reduce that problem, but still it is a major issue. Another major issue with this is that, of course, you don't really get 3-dimensional position tracking, and particularly when you have multiple people, it's difficult to see very much. So using regular video cameras for tracking hasn't really been an option in this study, although we have been using cameras just for reference purposes. In our lab, we have a very good, high-quality motion capture system from Qualisys, and this is an infrared system using these markers that you put on a body. One very good, nice thing about this type of system is that the lighting problem isn't really there because this works at the infrared level. And we also checked that having changing lights and these things don't interfere with the system as well. Here we get very, very good, accurate and precise 3D positioning of people, of course, within a fairly constrained space. And you can have multiple people, and in theory you can have as many as you like, but in practice, and this is something I'm going to discuss today, there are some limitations as to how many people you can put in use with a system like this. Most people use this for studying individual people, or a few people, and they have all been saying that we are crazy when we actually want to do this and do a full group of people. So let's see how this went. The downside to this type of system, of course, is that they are expensive and they are very sensitive to all sorts of disturbances in the space. So that's also one of the reasons why I don't really think that they would work outside the lab. And the third option, of course, is to use a sensor-based system, inertial sensors like accelerometers, where you don't have a lot of the problems I just mentioned. But of course, you don't have 3D position. You have or at least it's difficult to obtain it. You have the relative motion information instead, and you have the issue of synchronization. So to look at all of this, we have carried out 2 dance experiments. And the first one we did we set up our lab, and this is our lab with lots of gear. And we tried to figure out, okay, can we turn this into a club-like environment somehow? And we did our best. We turned off the light. We got some lighting effects. We got a disco ball. And the good thing is that this lab is located at the ground floor in our department. So it's right next to the lounge. So it's actually pretty easy to walk in and out. And so we invited a group of students to come along and to dance on a hot summer evening. So it was really, really hot, even for Norwegian standards. It was really super hot. We had 16 people at this time. They danced for 15 minutes to different tracks of electronic dance music. Played out. We have a 60-channel sound system, so it can get pretty loud in there, and it's definitely submersive. We used a setup with 9 Qualisys cameras mounted around the space. And for this setup, we decided to try out to have 1 head marker and 1 wrist marker per person. That was because we wanted to look both at general motion in the body, but also what happens in the hand. And we had tested this. We had done some pilot studies before we did this experiment, and then it had worked fine. We ran this at 100 Hertz, the system, but we experienced a lot of problems. And the main problem was that of occlusion of markers. Wrist occlusion was a much bigger problem than we had experienced in our pilot studies, mainly because the people actually danced so close together. We had, in our tests, they had been dancing further apart. So the wrist data we just had to abandon more or less directly. For the head data, we actually got pretty good recordings and fill levels, but we got a lot of broken trajectories, and that's problematic because you couldn't really follow the trajectories of people over time within the group. And that was mainly because people were moving all over the place, and some people were laying down on the floor, for example. They were doing all sorts of crazy stuff like this, and they were basically occluding these markers a lot. So that was a problem with these wrist markers, that people put their wrist markers up on their own head or to their neighbor's head, and then the trajectories got confused, and it was difficult to do any serious tracking in there. Despite that, we got pretty good overall quantity of motion data. So we will actually publish a paper on the kind of some of the general features of the group as such, but we weren't able to obtain any individual information in there. So there is a paper coming out in Empirical Musicology Review quite soon, where we're looking at this breakdown function that is in the middle of many of these electronic dance music tracks, and where we are very interested in looking at what happens when you get to the breakup and the build up again in these tracks, and what happens in the motion of the group at that point. But now I'm talking about the technology and methodology. So with all those problems and the partial failure of the first experiment, we did another experiment, again going back into the lab and getting our disco ball out again for this setting. And this time around, we also had a serious chat with the mocap wizard in our group, Min Ho Song, and he had recently published a paper where he had tried to find a theoretical measure for what type of sampling rate you should use with an optical motion capture system. And that's the solution that he has found, and that's the reference to that paper if you're interested in having an optical system. That's actually pretty cool. So you can determine the frame rate that you should use for your system based on the global minimum spacing between the markers that you expect, the global maximum speed or motion that you expect, and a tracking efficiency constant, which is constant for each individual motion capture setup. So we have both the Qualisys system and several OptiTrack systems, and they have different tracking efficiency constants. So that's a very interesting and useful thing. And Minho calculated that 100 Hertz would be too little. So he said that, well, you need at least to have 160. So we decided to go for 200 instead for our new recordings. That's not because people move so fast, but it's just because of how these optical systems work. So for our new system, we decided also to reduce down to 10 people to kind of see if that would help. We had 3 groups. We had a 10-minute session that was just making it more practical. And we also took in an additional 4 cameras from above to kind of try to see if that would help as well, plus the 9 original ones we had around the space. This time around we only used 1 head marker per person, and we decided, since we're still interested in what happens in the hands, we decided to use accelerometers on the hands rather than head markers to not confuse the system too much. And we ran this at 200 Hertz. And another important thing was that we calibrated the system at the head's height, not at the floor level. And we have previously in another system, we had done a very careful study of how calibration of an optical motion capture system influences the quality of the results that you get, and definitely says that you should try to calibrate at where your markers are in the space. Even though the system tells you that you get a good calibration, there's a difference in real life. So, a good thing with a high-quality system like Qualys is that you have synchronization built in, so you will get synchronized data. Of course, having accelerometers is not the same thing, and here we decided to use a set of accelerometers called AX3. It's inertial sensors made for medical purposes, and they work wonderfully, and they can be put into this armband that you see there. For synchronizing this, we did a very old trick. We just took all of them, and Ragnhild made a fantastic plastic automatic system for aligning all of these together, or putting them together, and then did kind of a calibration routine manually on the floor. And then that happened then before we set up for the experiment and put this back into place. Then, of course, we tried to make this as ecologically friendly as possible. So we had pizza out in the lounge, and we took all our new bachelor students as volunteers to participate in this. And they danced. And then let's look at results. We were very interested in seeing how well these accelerometers perform. So for this, based on this magic calibration routine that we had performed, plus some cross-correlation, we were able to then look at and see if it was possible to align these recordings. So we did this only at the beginning, at the end of the entire thing, with about 2 hours apart. And as you can see here, we managed to get more or less perfect alignment in the beginning. Here, these are the spikes from all of the 20 markers we had there. And also 2 hours later, we got the same thing. So that actually worked out very well with a simple MATLAB script. So at least that secured the alignment. And also we did this in front of the camera so that we had the audio as well together with this. Now, for the Qualys data, we were extremely interested in seeing if all our trouble of optimizing the system had actually worked out and getting better results. And yes, it had. We actually got 100% success or tracking for this, which is quite incredible considering that we have 30 people dancing and being all over the place. So the setup we have now is actually good enough for doing a kind of a proper dance study. And also with only one individual marker then on the head of people, which doesn't weigh anything at all. So it doesn't feel heavy at all for the participants, and they don't really think about it either when they dance. So based on this, we are now analyzing all of this, and we have been able to then also get individual data for people so that we can more precisely look into what happens when you get to this breakdown and build up parts of the tracks. And can follow, for example, look at what happens if someone takes the lead, for example, in building up again in the motion as well. So let me try to conclude. Optical or inertial? Well, of course, this is not really easy to say, but at least what we have shown now is that it is indeed possible to carry out a fairly large-scale group experiment with very high-quality data with groups of 10 people at least here, and we will try to have some more. The trick was to use more cameras. More is always better, I guess. High frame rate, better calibration, and also fewer markers. So that helps, but again, we're talking about fairly complex motion. This result in near zero data loss. Of course, then also a high quality recording. The question, of course, is whether we can actually do this outside of the lab, because our long-term aim is really to do this in a real club environment. And we are thinking about whether we should dare to take this out in in the town somewhere. Right now, I'm not really comfortable about doing that because there's just so many things that can go wrong in a setting like that. But what we are going to do is to test these guys in a real club setting, because we did manage to get good results, and also, of course, with the synchronization solved, that will help a lot there. So moving on, our next steps now is to carry out more of these optical-based recordings within our lab. Try to push with a few more people, and also look more into different details there in the analysis. And we will also try to carry out a group interaction study somewhere in town with these inertial sensors. That basically concludes my talk. If we can just also then take the opportunity to plug, we have a MOOC, Massive Open Online Course, Music Moves, starting on Monday. So if anyone is interested in learning more about this, have any students that want to learn about this, or just anyone, we have 2,500 people signed up so far, but please join in as well. You find it on FutureLearn. Thank you.